Hello testers and welcome to a special 2-hour STP community webinar. My name is James and I'm the event coordinator here at STP, and we are excited to have everyone on the webinar today. Bradley Baird will be joining us today from Orem, Utah, and he will be giving a special 2-hour presentation on how you can become a better team leader and develop your management traits and skills. A few things to go over before we get started today. Coming to you in April from STP, Raj Subramanian's Career Advancement Workshop. Join Raj in this 2-day virtual workshop as he reveals all his secrets to help you discover your dream job and become hugely successful. He will share various tips, tricks, and tools related to finding your dream job, cracking interviews, exponentially increasing your salary, becoming a rock star at work, and building your personal brand. No matter where you are in your career, this workshop will help you learn the different strategies to make you love your job all over again. The virtual workshop will take place on Tuesday and Wednesday, April 13th and 14th from 11 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Visit SoftwareTestPro.com to learn more about and register for Raj's workshop and start your journey for your dream job today. A reminder, we have an upcoming panel webinar on April 7th featuring Ashley Hunsberger, Angela Weiberg, and Angela Riggs and Lena Weiberg, This panel presentation discusses how we can deal with and overcome stress by focusing on self-care, and also how important it is for us to take time for ourselves. Be sure to visit SoftwareTestPro.com to register for this webinar and check out other webinars coming up later this year from STP. Looking to practice your speaking and presentation skills or have an idea for a webinar topic? STP is looking for both new and veteran speakers and is currently filling the second half of the 2021 community webinar schedule. So submit your proposal today at SoftwareTestPro.com. If you're on social media and talking about today's webinar, be sure to tag us at SoftwareTestPro and use the hashtag STPWebinar. Also give Bradley a follow while you're at it at BTBaird. And with that, please welcome Bradley Baird. Bradley, we are excited to have you. And you now have control.
Great, thanks, James. Hopefully you can all hear me just fine.
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, then let's get started after that great introduction. Appreciate James and the folks at STP to give me this chance to spend a few minutes with you guys. Let's talk a little bit about teams and how we can make them better and how we can be a better manager. If you are a manager now or you want to be a manager, but anyway, that's the whole point of this. So let's just quickly go through our agenda today. We'll just do a quick introduction, a class description, and then we've got a few parts that we're going to go through. Part one is just getting started. You know, what do you do when you're a newly minted team manager? Then we'll discuss the team, what your team interactions are, and then on part three, we'll talk about flight risks, incentives, and underperformers. So what do you do? How do you deal with the day-to-day pieces of dealing with the people in your team? And then depending on how much time we have when they're end, I've got a few thoughts to ponder that we'll close with here. So just getting started, there's a really quick bio of me, just some of the things I've been doing. I've been in the QA industry for 30 years now. I originally started out in the film industry. I've got a few publications, some software patents, and the people at STPCon have been kind enough to let me present with them for over a decade now, and actually even have a Grammy Award in technical excellence. And so that's kind of was a fun thing to do. So let me just go back a little bit in time just so you can kind of get an idea of me and the history behind where I am. I originally started, as you noticed, I got a film degree. And so these are places that I worked BCE, or before the computer era, as I like to call it. Worked in a motion picture studio, a few television studios, did some films and some other things, which was all very interesting and helped me really understand the creative side of things and how present and how to talk to people, and just the whole idea behind how do you make sure that you have an audience and keep them engaged. And then after that, I started working in the computer industry, and so these are some places where I've been CE, or in my computer era. Started off at WordPerfect years ago, Worked at Novell twice. You can see them on there 2 times with 2 different logos. A few other places, and then here most recently, some other companies that I've worked with, and currently I'm working with the Family Search Organization, helping people to understand their family history and their roots. It's a great place to be. So let's go in and get started with the boot camp and talk about, is this really the thing that I want to do? Is this webinar going to be a good experience? And so let's just dive right straight into it. And so if you've been around for a while, maybe you're getting a little bit more responsibility, or maybe you've just actually been promoted, and maybe you're not actually a titled manager or like that, but the senior management's looking to you because maybe you're the senior person on the team and they want you to be more of a team lead. So the whole idea is that once you reach that particular designation, there's some things that you need to start thinking about now other than just yourself as you move out of the individual contributor role more into the management role. So let's let's talk about what those things are going to be. So we're going to explore ideas on how do we develop management traits and skills. We'll discuss things, what do we do every day to keep our team happy, keep them focused. And then we'll discuss a few techniques on what we do when things aren't going so well, because we know that not always does everything turn out exactly the way we wanted it to. And sometimes we have to make some tough decisions. So let's just move right in. I hope you have your pencil and paper handy for those of you that are old school, or your note-taking apparatus ready to take a couple of notes here. But let's get started on. So let's just let's go under the assumption that you're a brand new manager now, that you've been promoted, and now you have a team that you're in charge of. And it could be that this is a team that you're familiar with because it's the team that you've been on for a long time, or maybe you ended up in this position because you got a new job someplace else as the manager because you weren't able to progress where you were. And so obviously the best place to start is to understand, where do we start? And the places to start are by answering these particular questions. This is what you need to understand. The first thing you need to ask yourself is, what is it that I need to know? What are the kinds of things that are going to be important for me as a manager as I move forward? And so ponder on that, see if you can come up with some ideas and see, these are some of the things that I came up with. The other thing that you need to make a list of are what resources are available to me. It's really hard to manage something if you don't have any idea what that particular thing is that you're trying to manage. It reminds me of a job that I started. And when I showed up on my very first day, my boss, who was the executive vice president, said, "I know you have a team, but I have no idea where they are or how many people you have." And which was interesting. So I figured he would probably know that, but that was my first task, was figure out how many team members I had and where did those team members reside. So, but in addition to just simply people, excuse me, you understand that there are or other things that you have to be aware of just besides that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. The other thing that's really important to understand is that obviously not everything is going to go exactly the way that you wanted it to all the time. And so where do I go for help? When you run into a problem, understand, where can I find the help that I need to make sure that I'm successful and to solve the problem that I have? The other thing that you need to understand is, how are you going to be measured? What is the yardstick? What is it that people are going to judge you by as you start this new role? And then the last thing, the question that you need to answer is, how do I fit in? Where am I in the grand scheme of things within the company, within the team, within the division or the group, or however, wherever we are? And so let's go through really quickly each one of these questions, and I will offer some suggested answers to these particular questions. And so let's get started. Taking inventory, what are the things that I have? First thing that you really need to understand is, what is your upline? Meaning, who is your manager and their manager and their manager? It's always very important to understand who it is that you will be accountable to, who you will be reporting to, and understand who those people report to. It may seem like a fairly, I mean, a lot of these things I think seem like common sense, but sometimes when you're especially if you're in a large organization, understanding organizational structure isn't as straightforward as you think it should be. And so it's really good. Take a minute, understand exactly who is it that's in your upline. And then, of course, you need to understand your downline. Who are you directly responsible for? Who are your team members? Um, who are the people that you will be directly overseeing on a day-to-day? And then understand, who are your peers? Are there other managers? Are you in a bigger company or smaller company? Who are the people that I now associate with or look to for guidance and instruction, or can help me do the things that need to be done on a peer level? And then obviously the next thing you need to understand is, what are your assets? And when I say assets, I mean pretty much everything that maybe even be tangible or intangible, whether that be things like building space, how many desks do you have, how many computers do you have? We're in the testing industry, and so do you have a test lab? Do you not have a test lab? Do you contract that out? Um, do you have well-educated people on your team? Are they seasoned? Are they brand new? Are they in between? So just understanding, what are the things that you have that are beneficial, that are an asset to you. And then on the flip side is, what are your liabilities? Do you not have seasoned people? Do you not have desk space? Do you not have a test lab? Do you not have the equipment that you need? But just understanding, what are the things that I don't have that maybe I'm going to need as I move forward. And again, the idea of the people, who are all the people around you? The better that you understand your working circumstances, the better that you're going to be able to deal with. And when I say people, I don't mean just directly people that you may talk to on a day-to-day, but maybe you work with some third-party vendors or some external customers or consultants or other individuals that are associated with you and your new role, that you can understand who they are. And again, equipment, we talked about that just briefly, knowing what you have, what you don't have, what you might be able to need. And then finally, just kind of step back and look and see, what are any other resource that I may have available to me that will be useful and that can help me to do the things that I need to do to be successful. So now as we move forward, once you understand all of this, that you've answered these questions, you've taken your inventory, now you need to, it's time to move forward and put things into practice as to, what is it that we're actually going to do. And so to make things a little bit easier, we're going to break things down into two main categories, or two challenges that you have. And the first challenge that you have now as a manager is that you have to manage resources. And we spoke briefly of that in the inventory, is trying to understand, what resources do you have at your disposal? What is it that you have that you can use, that you can't use? And again, these resources can be anything that could be, you know, let's just say it's equipment, um, the things that you use on a day-to-day basis to get things done. Time is a major resource challenge that you're always going to be trying to fight against or have to learn how to work with. Everybody has deadlines, everybody has constraints, and understanding what your time constraints are going to be critical as you move forward in your new role. Some of you may have money that you're in charge of. You may be now managing a budget. Maybe you're not, but just in case you are, it's good to understand the ins and outs of that budget. Make sure that you understand what your budget authority is, how much you have, what you can spend without permission, what you can spend that you need, where is that threshold that you need to get permission for. It varies. Some companies I've been at, I could have discretion over purchases up to $10,000. I didn't need to ask anybody's permission for it. If I needed it, I could just buy it. Other places, I couldn't even spend 10 cents without getting permission for. And so it just depends on your situation, but understand what your position is and what you need to do. And especially for us in the computer industry, this one, the IP or intellectual property, is a major concern for a lot of companies. Most things that the biggest challenge that companies have is protecting their intellectual property. I mean, after all, that is what makes them who they are. And if somebody is able to steal that, appropriate it, get advanced looks, or somehow get involved in, getting control over any of the IP that your team has or is in control of, could spell some major problems for you. So make sure you understand what your intellectual property challenges are. And a lot of companies, especially larger companies now, will do trainings once a year. I know the last 3 companies that I've worked for, we've had mandatory trainings every year on how to protect and safeguard IP. So if you don't do that in your company, it might be an idea to look into it. And if you do, pay attention to help keep you out of trouble. Okay, so having covered the first challenge, now let's move on and look at what our second challenge is, and that is managing people. After all, that is what managers do, right? Is they manage people. I have a brother who worked for a fire department. He put in 25 years, and he was eventually promoted to the captain of his station. And the comment that he made to me was, I'm absolutely surprised at how much of my time I spend dealing with personnel issues rather than being a fireman. And so depending on where you're working or how big or small your company is, you may discover that a lot of your management time gets taken up in dealing with people. And so again, that question of time comes into play. And how are you going to manage all of these people's time to make sure that they are productive in doing what they're going to do? The second thing that you really need to be concerned about is knowledge. I have in there subject matter experts. And again, this is part of your inventory. Do you currently have subject matter experts on your team? Do you have people that you can call on? Do you need to come up with plans to create these? Again, understand, make sure that you have people that are well-versed in the things that they're trying to do. The other thing that's going to become a major hot point for you as a manager is compensation. How do you deal with compensation issues? How do you make sure that your people are fairly compensated? How do you have discussions with them surrounding that between you and HR? Depending on how high up you are in the chain, you may have a lot of say-so over someone's compensation, or you may have no say-so. Again, it just depends on the company, but understanding those things are very important. The next thing that you need to really be aware of and work with your people on are goals. People need to have goals. They need to have something that they understand that they're working towards, that they're trying to achieve, and that will give them not only personal satisfaction, but also give them a chance for recognition in the workplace. And the last thing that I want to touch on in this section as far as the challenge of managing people is career growth. You, as a manager, now have a very important responsibility to make sure that the people that you are in charge of also are able to grow in their careers and to learn. Again, many companies have different philosophies on this, but personally, I've never found more fulfillment being a manager as those times when I'm able to help people either realize a dream, learn a new skill, grow, become promoted in their own right, or basically learn the things that they need to so that they can be successful and that they can care for themselves or any families or other responsibilities that they may have outside of the workplace. So those are the two challenges that are going to become paramount to you. So these are things to understand, think about. And now let's move forward a little bit and let's focus on you as the individual. And so what I want you to do now is, as a new manager, is you need your own personal goals. Understand what is it that you're going to achieve. So think about what do I want to do as a manager, and then write down, what are the steps that you need to get there. These are very common goal setting techniques, but again, understanding, you know, what is it that you're going to need? Are you going to need help from somebody else? Are you going to need some additional training? Are you going to need, um, ideas or somebody to mentor you, whatever, but just write down the list of all the things that you think you're going to need to be successful and to help you achieve your goals. Because after all, if you're not being successful in your job for yourself, it's very difficult to help someone else be successful in their job for themselves. So start with the self-inventory. Understand what is it that, what are you currently doing that's good? What are you currently doing that's bad? Think about, how is it that you can put your in itself into a position to be able to succeed. And then the next thing that's important to write down and understand is, what are your limitations? Sometimes we tend to think that we can do anything, especially if you look on social media, you see that pretty much everybody except you is doing everything. But realize that those are everybody's highlights. They're not their everyday things that they do. And so you need to understand what your limitations are and not compare yourself with others, but just know where you're not going to be able to go, what you can do, what you can't do, but just have a good understanding of where you are right now, and understand as well that your limitations today are not going to be the same as your limitations in 6 months. But again, this whole idea of self-introspection, setting personal goals, is knowing what you can and can't do right now. Another very important thing to understand is, where are you going to flex? Every company has rules. You have rules. Your team may have rules. Um, Sometimes we tend to bend those rules a little bit. And so what is the area that you're going to bend your rules in? Understand, if you make these decisions beforehand, when they come up, then it's a lot easier to know what you're going to do. If you have a person in a meeting who's being unruly, or is taking things in a direction that you don't want to go in, are you going to allow them to continue to do that even though it's not professional? Are you going to flex on that, or are you going to immediately call them out? Um, so just understand, where is it you're going to be willing to bend rules a little bit, if they need to, or where it is that you're going to stay right in line. And then along with that, the other thing that you truly have to understand is where are you going to break? What is it that's going to push you over the edge? And this is an area that we definitely don't want to be in. And so it's in, excuse me, it's important to understand where is it that you're going to possibly break. We don't want that to happen, but again, if you recognize that beforehand, then it can help you to be prepared for understanding when you may get close to that particular situation. Maybe a specialized thing, or maybe everybody's a generalist. But again, in order to be a team, you have to work together as a team and not compare one team member to another team member in areas where comparison is not essential or important. And so part of your team goals would be knowledge transfer. Make sure that everybody on the team understands what they're doing. Um, and as part of that, they need to have some training that they can be a part of in the teams, right? So in my teams, I always have the team members perform trainings at least once a quarter in our team meetings. Everybody has a chance to present some topic at least once during that quarter, and I think it's important that you as a team leader give those opportunities to people in your team so that they can also show what they're learning and help the other team members to become stronger. And then the next thing is do you have specialists? Do you need specialists? Some teams only work on a single project. Other teams work on multiple projects. I've been on teams where we've had as many as 50 projects that we're working on at one single time. And some of them were completely unrelated. Some of them may be a software project, some of them were hardware projects. And so you may need to have people that specialize in one area or another. But again, as part of your team makeup, understand who is going to be your specialist and how are you going to help them achieve that particular designation. Then one of the most important things is to make sure that every team member has each other's back. You cannot have an effective team if the minute somebody walks out of a room, other team members make comments about that particular person, or if there's a particular challenge, or if something maybe was missed, and how quickly does somebody get thrown under the bus, so to speak. You don't want to have team members that aren't working together. And you as a manager, it is now your job to figure out if you have problems and people don't have each other's back, is how are you going to resolve that issue, and how are you going to help people to understand and treat each other in a professional manner. You need to be realistic in your expectations in your team goals. Don't set goals that you know cannot be achieved. But again, it's good to set goals that will stretch, especially people who work in an agile development environment are all familiar with the development team when they set spike goals. And your team should definitely have something similar to that, but be realistic in what your team can and can't do. But at the same time, make sure that you have things that will stretch and force your team to grow and to evolve. Okay, so moving on to our next idea is, because you're now the manager and it's your job to oversee these people, obviously every single day you're going to be making some sort of judgment or measurement of this particular person. And so it's really important that you measure the right things. Some things that you may think important today maybe aren't so important tomorrow, but the key is that when you are making those judgments and those measurements, that you're looking at the right things. Let's just look at a couple of examples. One I like particularly from the retail sector is the idea of a loss leader. If you work in retail, or if you ever worked in retail, you're probably very familiar with this term of loss leaders. And that's when a company advertises or sells a product at a loss simply to get people into the store. Probably the most what's the right word? The most common example of this today, or the most prevalent, is at Costco. If you shop at the Costco store, you know, you walk in the door and they'll sell you a hot dog and a soft drink for $1.50. Everybody knows that Costco loses money on that. In fact, I believe in their last quarterly report that I heard of, Costco lost was something like $15 million on their hot dog and the rotisserie chicken. They have two loss leaders. The rotisserie chicken is the other one that they sell for $5. But the thing is that the reason Costco loses $15 million on hot dogs and chicken is because it gets people into their stores. And if you're measuring Costco on their success by simply looking at their loss leader, you would say they're a complete and utter failure. But much to, you know, to Costco's delight, the fact that they lose that $15 million actually allows them to earn millions of dollars more. And so be careful when you're measuring. Maybe you may see something that doesn't look right, but try to understand what is the intent behind that. The other measurement that could get you in trouble is what I like to call defects found versus defect found. And that may sound a little bit confusing, but again, as most of us are QA people, part of our job is to find defects. And so if we're not finding defects, then you could probably make the case that you're not doing your job. But sometimes some people take it to extreme. I had a team member once who was logging literally 100 defects every single week. And nobody else was even anywhere close to that. The average for the rest of the team was somewhere around 10. The problem was that this one individual who was logging all those defects was making it, he didn't like the development team, and so he was really trying to make their lives miserable. And so he would get so amazingly nitpicky on every little teeny tiny thing that he could possibly think of, and log it as a defect. The downside to that was that after a couple of weeks, the development team stopped looking at anything that he logged as a defect. They just absolutely refused to look at it because they felt that he was just wasting this time. And so, again, if you're going to measure somebody, make sure that you're measuring them on something that's actual. Measure them on what actual defects are, not something that they called a defect, so that they can know that. And again, as you're looking at contributions from your team members and things that you're going to measure, look at the timing, because timing is really, really important. Did this team member contribute to the project early on, or did they only contribute very late in the stage? Maybe they found a lot of very critical issues, but did they find them early or did they find them late? Because really, the whole idea, especially now with the movement in the QA industry with shift left, is we're supposed to find these things early, not late. We all know that the earlier we find an issue, the cheaper it is to fix it, which is one of the driving factors. But again, some team members like to be heroes and find major issues, but again, evaluate when were these things found, when were there major contributions, and you really should put more emphasis on those contributions that came earlier versus later. And then the last one that I really want you to look at when you're measuring is impact versus output. You may have some team members that really produce a lot of work of some sort or another. And they are, logging a lot of bugs. They make a lot of contributions in the meeting, and it looks like they're doing a lot. And maybe you have a team member or two that doesn't log so many defects and that doesn't talk a whole lot in your meetings or around. And to an outsider, they may be quick to judge who the more valuable person on that team is. But is the person who's not writing 15 bugs every single week, are they mentoring other people on the team? Are they helping other people do things? Are they keeping the team calm and on track? Are they kind of an unseen influence? And so overall, is their impact on the team actually greater than what you can actually measure? So these are things that you need to be kind of imagining to yourself, is what is the impact that this particular person is having versus simply measuring their output. The output. We can save our discussion of metrics for another day because that could go on for weeks. But just be careful when you're measuring that you are truly indeed measuring the right things that you want to look at. Okay, let's move on to part number 2. That was all of the introduction areas of things that you need to do as a new manager. So now here in part 2, we want to talk about things that directly affect the team and understanding your team. And so these are the things that we're going to cover in part 2 of the presentation. There's things that you should do, things that you shouldn't do. We'll talk about flight risks, incentives, and then lastly, underperformers. So let's move on into that and see if we can truly understand our team. The first thing that I think is really key in understanding your team is your team are humans. They're not resources. That's what corporations like to call people now, or human resources. But that's just way too abstract. You cannot fall into the trap of looking at a person as a resource. You need to understand that this person is a person, and you need to treat people as people, obviously. And we're going to go into that in a lot more depth as to why that is really, really important. But I think everyone here probably will agree with me that being treated as a real human being rather than just a number or a face really is very important to each one of us, and it really changes our outlook and the way that we want to do things. I mean, honestly, if you look at the way that systems that are designed to dehumanize people, like the criminal system, once you are incarcerated, your name gets taken away and you're given a number. You're not a person anymore, but a number. And we don't want to do that in the workplace. We are all people, so let's just understand that we are people. The next thing that is really, truly important as far as working with and understanding your team is this idea right here is you do not lie to your team. Never, ever, ever. That is one thing that you should never do, because you don't want to lose their trust. And how many times have you sat in a room when somebody, especially upper management, has said something that you know for a fact not to be true? It really lowers your motivation, it lowers your respect, it lowers your trust, and it just doesn't do anybody any good in the long run. And so if you find yourself in a situation where somebody asks you a question that you cannot give a good answer to, instead of lying and trying to cover up, say something else like, "I'm sorry, I can't answer that." Or, I mean, you'll probably have some idea of the best way to respond, but again, do not lie. And then moving right along with that, or hand in hand with that concept, is be honest with people. Now, you may say that, well, isn't being honest and not lying the same thing? Well, they are similar, but again, the lie only comes from your mouth. Now, when I talk about being honest, I mean, if you are talking to a team member and you say, "Hey, you're doing a great job. We love you. Or you're wonderful," and then you walk out of that person's presence and into the next room and talk to somebody else and you say, "Hey, uh, John just really isn't doing a good enough job, and I'm really concerned about him." So, you have to be honest to yourself and be honest with others, because people will truly pick up on that. We all do, and you pick up on it as well. Again, show respect to your team. If you respect them, they will respect you back. It is one of the things that we really, really want to have. And we're going to talk a little bit more about respect a little bit later on as well. Um, Next thing about your team is make sure that you communicate with them. Don't leave them in the dark. If there's something that you expect that they are doing or that they understand, make sure they know. Um, and don't just assume that they heard it from somebody else, or unfortunately, just because somebody sent it in an email doesn't mean that they read it, doesn't mean that they know it. So make sure that you communicate with the people on your team in a style that they can understand and that they can work with. And then again, we talked about setting goals, but make sure that the goals that you set with these people uh, are personalized, that each person has a goal or something that's unique to them in addition to whatever the goals are that the team has. You want people to feel like that they are, individuals, that they're important and that you're working well with them. And then the last item in this particular topic of understanding your team is a concept that's called taste the soup. Some of you may have heard of this before, you may be familiar with it, but basically what it means, and this is really more uh, geared towards somebody who maybe is coming into a team brand new. Maybe, you've changed companies and you've never been here before, you don't really understand, or maybe you've been promoted as a team member in a completely different team within your same organization. But the concept of taste the soup means before you want to make a change, before you're going to do something radical or maybe even not radical, make sure you understand what the current situation is. And so the taste the soup metaphor comes from the kitchen, in that you see a pot of soup boiling on the stove, you don't just immediately start adding ingredients or spices or things. You taste it first. You want to taste it and see what is going on here before you understand what it is that you may or may not have to change. Some people think that just because they're a new manager, that they have to change things. And that's not true. You don't always have to change things. Maybe the person you're taking over for was one of the most amazing managers in the entire world, and they have a perfect team. Granted, that's rare, but it could happen. Or they have a very good team. And you don't want to change things simply for change's sake. One company I worked for, I had um, 4 different directors that came in, and all 4 of them wanted to implement their own style. And part of the reason why we had 4 different ones is because none of them tasted the soup beforehand. They just came in and made wholesale changes to match what they wanted or what they were expecting without understanding the current environment, and none of them were successful, unfortunately, in that particular situation. And so think about it as a new manager. Before you make a change, make sure you understand what the soup tastes like, so to speak. Okay, so let's move on to our next topic of cognitive styles. Not everybody on the team is the same. You're going to have team members that react very differently to the same situation. And so as you're looking at your team and measuring them, make sure that you understand these particular cognitive styles, whether they're introverts or ambiverts or extroverts. Um, if they're an asker versus a guesser, this is sometimes can be a really big challenge for people. But if you understand that this is the way that people work, it helps you to understand better, who that person is. Starter versus finisher. There are some people who are excellent at starting a project, but can never finish them. You have other people that are excellent at finishing projects, but can't start them. Maybe, especially if you're in an automation role, maybe you've got a team member who is really good at writing tests, but is really bad at maintaining those tests. But you have somebody else who can't really figure out how to get started, but once somebody has started it, they can pick it up and understand it and move forward. And so make sure that you put your starter in the starter role and your finisher in the maintainer role. So understand these particular styles, and it'll help you in your as you move forward as being a manager. And then right here, we have analytical, critical, and lateral thinkers. How do these people think? And then finally, we have the purist versus the pragmatist. So these cognitive styles are all important. So these are things that you need to understand and work through. And as you are figuring out each person on your team, I don't want you to label them per se, but I just want you to understand how this person learns, how this person works. And so obviously, how do you do that? Well, that's our segue into our next idea, which is the one-on-one interview. As a manager, you need to have one-on-one interviews with your team. The frequency of those depends on the team member themselves. It depends on what level they're at. I mean, if you are simply a manager, uh, you may want to interview your team members every single week. If you're a team director, say you're the director and you've got 3 managers under you and 35 engineers that work for you, you're not going to be able to meet with all 38 of those people every single week. So maybe you meet with your managers once a week and you meet with the other 35 people maybe once a month or once a quarter. But I highly recommend that regardless of what level you are, that you meet with every single person that's under you at least once a quarter if you're really high up the management chain. And if you're very close down, you should be meeting with these people at least once a week. And so, again, make sure that they are frequent. Make sure that they are private. Um, do them in an office, do them over lunch, do them offsite. It doesn't matter, but just make sure that you find a place where you can have a private conversation with this person. They may be on, it may be over the computer now and everybody's working remote. And so maybe you're just going to do this over Zoom or Teams or go to webinar or whatever your preferred project is. And of course, once you get into this meeting, I would like to suggest an agenda for you to follow. I know that some of my managers, when I've had one-on-ones, the first thing they tell me is, okay, this is your meeting. This is your time to tell me, what you think. Which is a sentiment that sounds really good, but in reality, it's not really my meeting. It's really the manager's meeting. Um, the idea that they're trying to convey behind that is that they want me to feel completely at ease and open to bring up and discuss any topic I want and help them. But at the same time, because they're the manager, or you're the manager, you really should have a little bit of focus to the meeting so it's just not completely nonsensical. And so how you want to do these things is totally up to you, but let me just suggest at least these are the topics that you should touch on. Whether these are brought up by you or by your team member, it doesn't really matter, but make sure that in your meeting at some point you at least cover these 4 things, which are: what successes did this person have since we last met? Are there areas that need to improve? Um, if you you should have your goals with this person. So make sure that you review the goals. Are they moving forward? Are they being completed? Do they need to be modified? Make sure that you understand of that, because really the whole point behind this is accountability. You want the person to understand that as a team member, they have responsibilities, and you as a manager, it is your job to make sure that they're fulfilling those responsibilities. And this one-on-one time is a chance for both of you to be together so that you can make sure that you're all on track with each other. The other really, really important thing behind having these one-on-ones is that every company, you go through um, a yearly or sometimes a bi-yearly evaluation process. And there is nothing that I feel is more of a failure on the part of management is for a person to show up for one of those yearly evaluations and for the manager to say, uh, you did really well here and here, but in this area you were really lacking, and I'm going to mark you way down. Um, if that's the first time that your team member has heard that come out of your mouth, that is an utter and complete failure on your part as a manager. No one should ever walk into an evaluation and be told something that they need to work on that they have never heard of before. That is unacceptable on so many levels. So make sure that you discuss those kinds of issues with your team members way before evaluations ever come up on the radar, so that no one is surprised. Um, One of the things that you need to do as a new manager, especially if you don't know your team yet, consider doing a capability matrix. You've seen these before, probably. If you haven't, then this is just a generic one. And really, you know, you fill out the top column with whatever it is that's important to you. If you're running a QA organization, is this maybe you need to know, is this person automation? Do they know automation tools? Do they know how to do Selenium? Do they know how to use Sauce Labs? Do they know how to use Node.js? Do they know uh, any of the other different types of automation tools that are available? Can they write in Java or JavaScript or Python? You need to understand what your team can do and what they can't do, what their skill sets are. Maybe they're really good at setting up test systems. Maybe they really understand hardware or virtual machines. And so this is important. Or now, as we're moving everything into the cloud, they understand containers and Dockers and Kubernetes and continuous deployment systems. And so understanding what your team members do know and don't know is really important. So make sure that you have a list of those somewhere that you can reference. So let's quickly just go over a few other concepts. This one is, as a team leader, these are some of the things that you should do. And when I say you should do them, I mean you really should do these things. These are the kinds of things that make you a manager versus just simply a person on the team. You're not just the team member. So the first thing you need to do as a manager is make sure that you give credit to people. Um, if you have something positive to say, make sure you do it publicly. Let everybody know somebody's successes. If you have something that negative to say, then do that in private. Don't do that publicly. Nobody wants to be shamed in front of their peers or other people. If you notice that there's a problem that somebody's having that you need to address, make sure that you do that in a confidential manner. Um, don't do it publicly. And the third thing that you really need to do is, when you're giving credit and somebody's had a huge success, make sure you pass that up the line. It doesn't hurt. It makes you look good. It makes them look good. You want people to celebrate successes and make sure that people up above know that good things are happening, and don't try to hide it, and don't try to take credit for something that somebody else did, because everybody knows um, when that happens. And so be honest again, inform management of what you can do. And so let's talk a little bit about, what kinds of rewards can you give your people? Obviously, the biggest one is a raise. That's something that pretty much everybody likes to get um, when those times come. So make sure that you're heavily involved in that if your company is doing that. Unfortunately, some companies don't. I worked at one company, went 4 years, and nobody got a raise. Uh, on the obverse to that, I worked at another company where everybody got a raise every 4 months. So, understand what your system is and work within the constraints that you have. Um, you want your team members to succeed. Find out if their goals are to be promoted. And if they are, then when the time is right, make sure that that happens. Help them be promoted. Um, make sure that you give them recognition and help everybody understand, again, successes. But one of the tricky things with recognition, though, is when you do that, make sure that you give things that people actually want, not something you think they want, as this little picture shows. For some people, the most important thing they want is a money or a bonus. Other people just want a little award that they can put on their desktop or hang on their wall, whereas other people, maybe they want a vacation or some time off or something. But just realize again that as you're giving out rewards and you're recognizing people's successes and you're trying to do something nice for them, again, this is not always a one size fits all type of a situation. So understand your team, understand what that person wants and what is really going to be helpful for them. The other thing that's really important is your team building activities. Make sure that you are holding those as much as you can. I know it's difficult right now with COVID times, but things will get better. And so as they do improve, make sure that you have your team building activities, and whenever possible, they should be outside of the work environment. It's amazing the difference a team building activity makes outside the office versus inside. So if you can, move them outside the office to anywhere, even if it's just outside in a park someplace. Do that. Make sure that you're doing things to help everybody learn and to be together. And this next point that I want to make is the whole team needs to be involved. When you're doing one of these team building activities, try as hard as you can to schedule it at a time when every single team member can be there. That could be difficult, especially if you have a really large team, but do everything you can to make sure the whole team is there, because doing a team building activity without the entire team always leaves a hole or a blank, and the person who's not involved always feels a little bit left out, regardless of the reason that they weren't able to attend. So please try to make sure that the entire team is involved in those. Use these things to build trust so that your team can work together and understand each other in the things that you can do. Um, Now, we've talked about things that we should do. Let's then move on to understanding that there are things that you should not do as a manager. Um, and hopefully you're going to be sympathetic to some of these things, and I hope that you'll recognize what these things are. But the first and foremost thing is, as a manager, you do not want to reward undesired behavior. If you have people doing things that they shouldn't be doing, do not reward them. And this is probably the biggest one that almost everybody falls into this trap. And that is, when you call a meeting, you start late because not everybody is there on time. And that is, you are rewarding undesired behavior, because what does that tell the rest of the team or tell everyone? Well, they'll just wait to start until I get there. No, that's not the team member's prerogative. If you're the manager of the team and you've called a meeting, or you're expected to be at a meeting, then you should be professional. They should be professional. You should start that meeting on time. Don't reward those that choose to show up late for whatever reason. I once, I had a problem with this with one of my teams where people were showing up 3, 4, 5 minutes late to our team meetings. And so one day we were having a meeting. It was on a Friday. It was after lunch on Friday, and we had a team meeting. It was at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Now, some people will say that's not a good time to do a team meeting, but that's when our meeting was. When time came for the meeting to start at 2 o'clock, I had 3 people in the room with me. And I had 6 people that hadn't shown up yet. And I knew every single one of those people were in the office, they were back from lunch, and that they were not in other meetings or on other phone calls. They just simply weren't there yet. And so the 3 people in the room, as I looked at them, I said, all right, guys, when this meeting is over, you are excused for the rest of the day. Just go home, but do not tell your other team members. And they were all like, oh, really? Cool. And so we had a half-hour meeting, and when the meeting was over, those 3 people went home. The other 6 people who showed up late didn't hear that announcement, and they stayed and worked the rest of the day. Now, of course, even though I said don't tell anybody, you know how often that works, everybody found out about it, and people did not show up late for my meetings again. It was a very simple, very effective method, but again, I did not want to continue to reward the undesired behavior. Uh, the other thing is that you have team members, you give them assignments, make them accountable for those assignments. If you give an assignment, ask for a follow-up. I worked on one team where we had a manager who would give assignments and then never followed up on them. And everybody in the room, after assignments were given, would just look at each other and say, I'm not going to do it because he's never going to ask about it. So again, undesired behavior, if you give an assignment, you expect it to be done, but make sure that you held those people accountable for it. And if work is not up to standard, don't reward people for it. Make sure that they understand that they need to improve their game. So again, do not reward undesired behavior. Uh, Whatever that behavior is, it's up to you as the team manager to understand what is the behavior that you need, what is it that you need to correct, and then make sure that you correct it and not reward it by doing things that are counterproductive. Uh, the other thing that's really important is, do not micromanage your team. You hire a team because they're smart people, that they understand what they're supposed to be doing. And if you're just going to do it anyway, then why do you have somebody on your team? Give team the assignments, let them do it, and don't constantly look over their shoulder, making sure that they're doing it or seeing what they're doing every minute of every day. Do not be a micromanager. Nobody appreciates it, and it does not build confidence or uh, team camaraderie when you feel like you're always constantly under a microscope. So just don't do it. Now, on the flip side of that is don't punish desired behavior, which is another thing that managers tend to do a lot. When people are doing the right things, make sure that you reward, not necessarily reward, but that you recognize that they're doing the right thing. You'll sit in the meetings over and over again and you tell your people, if you have a problem, you have an issue that's come up, come to me and I'll help you, I will solve it. So when somebody comes and knocks on your door because they're doing exactly what you asked them to do, and they say, hey, I need some help, Brad, can you help me with this? Don't say, oh, no, I'm busy, go away, or whatever. Don't punish them for doing what you've asked them to do. Don't make them feel bad. If it's not a good time, then say, hey, James, yeah, I would love to help you with that particular problem, but I've got this thing I have to do. Can you come back in 30 minutes and we'll discuss it? If you cannot do what the desired behavior is right at that moment, then make sure you get a plan so that you can do it. Um, you know, don't just ignore it when people are doing things wrong, or when people are doing things right, right? Make sure that you don't punish their behavior. Don't give somebody else a pass for doing something that they shouldn't have done. Make sure that the people um, are being treated fairly and equally, and don't criticize somebody if you don't want your team members criticizing, then don't criticize them. And again, if people are doing the right things, if they're doing the things that you've asked them to do, then don't punish them for doing it. Let them do it and move on. Part of the problem that you also have as a manager is that, you know, maybe you change direction too much. Don't change direction. Once you've set your team goals and your things that you need to do, stick with it and move forward. Again, if you're working in an agile environment, you're familiar with this. Once you've set your sprint and you've set your tasks for that sprint, nobody likes it when somebody comes along and says, oh, we've got this thing in the backlog we need to add into the sprint. Well, you just had sprint planning and nobody brought that up, right? So again, don't change your direction. Keep to what you've planned, move forward, and do everything you can to push that item back to the planning stage for whenever the next planning is, right? Do your research so that you're doing the right thing, stay on course, make sure that you're moving forward, and then most importantly, if you do have to change direction and you have to make things different than what you had planned, you can explain why to the team, why you have to do that, but understand at the same time, do not ask their permission for the change. Don't say, guys, we need to do this. Is this okay if we do that? No, it's not their decision. It's your decision as the manager. So tell them, you know what, we need to do this, and make sure that they understand that the direction has to change, but don't do it in such a way that you're asking permission of them because you're the one in charge, not them. And again, don't play favorites. You know, don't have cliques that you have. Treat everybody with equality, and then reward on performance and not on feelings. You may not like a person on your team, but if they're a rock star in many areas, make sure that you recognize it. And conversely, you may like somebody on the team, but they don't perform, and don't give them something special because everybody's going to recognize it. So don't do that. And then lastly here, let me just do this one and then we'll take just a really short 5-minute break for everybody. Summarize, this is an amazing book. If you ever need a book to read while you're looking for something, Effective DevOps, it's a great book on DevOps, but it's also a great management book. And one of the points that they brought out is that a great leader is one who can bring out the best in people around them rather than just focusing on themselves or a few rock stars. And these skills can make the difference between an effective organization and an ineffective one. So ponder on that and think about it. But again, I think that really kind of hits in a nutshell what managers are supposed to do. So I know we've been talking for a while. We probably went a little bit longer than we should have, but let's stop here for about 5 minutes for a break, and then we'll pick it up again and we'll go into part 3, where we'll talk about the flight risks and how to incentivize people when you really don't have any resources to do that with. So thank you. I think we're at 9 minutes past the hour, so let's pick up again at 15 minutes after the hour. Okay, it's about 6 minutes.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad.
Okay, I think our time is about up. I think we should probably get started again. What do you think, James? Are we good to go?
Yep, good to go, Bradley.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started again then. Let's go into this last section here, where part 3. We want to talk about flight risks, and then, you know, how do you incentivize people when you don't have anything to incentivize with? I think those are probably some really important things to understand, because again, as a manager, right, it's your job to make sure that your team is working together, that you are doing the best that you can with each other, and we know that, you know, people change. right? The average company has about a 12% turnover rate every year. And so you're going to lose people from time to time. But again, as as the manager, your job is to make sure that your team is doing well, and that you want to be able to, if people need to be promoted or if they need to go on to bigger and better things, obviously you want that to be inside the company, not outside the company. And so, you don't want to spend years training somebody just to have them walk out the door for what they perceive is probably a better opportunity someplace else, or they just have unhappy working conditions. They don't like the commute that they have to make. They don't like the workspace that they're assigned. They don't like the equipment that they have to work with. There's all kinds of reasons why people choose that they want to move on, leave the company, leave the team, or whatever it is that they're doing. And so you don't lose a person, right? I mean, you don't just lose a person. I mean, yes, you do lose a person, but that person then sometimes walks away with knowledge that's hard or impossible to replace. It seems like most teams have that one person on their team that knows everything, or we sometimes would say that if James got hit by a bus on the way to work this morning, we'd all be in real trouble. Uh, that's the situation you want to avoid whenever possible. And as a manager, it's your job to make sure that you're not in that situation. And especially if you have a person like that on your team, that you're doing everything you can to make sure that they're staying happy. The other big thing that's really important is that you don't want to be a training camp for your competition, right? I mean, don't spend your money training the people that are going to go work for the competition and make them successful. If you're going to spend money to train, then make sure that they are working for you. The one of the stories, one of the things that happened in one of the companies I worked at in the accounting department, there was one of the accountants made a mistake that cost the company $50,000. And of course, a lot of people were understandably upset and were saying that, you should fire this person for that mistake. The CEO response to those people was, there's absolutely no way I'm going to fire that person. I just spent $50,000 training them how to do this job right, and I'm not going to let that knowledge walk away to another place. So sometimes that's just the attitude that we have to have is, even if somebody makes a mistake, you don't want to be a training camp for your competition, right? So how do you know if you have a flight risk? So let's look at some of the warning signs, some of the things that you should be aware of with people that may be a flight risk. And some of these I think are pretty obvious, and you can see them, but they start showing up late for work. They start leaving early for work. They start polishing their resumes. And sometimes that can be a little bit embarrassing. I was sitting in a meeting once, not too terribly long ago, where one of the people in the room was asked to present on something, and so they plugged their computer in and put it up on the presentation board, and on their desktop, front and center, was their resume sitting right there, which really was kind of embarrassing for that person and made everybody else in the room a little bit uncomfortable. That person had been polishing their resume, and sure enough, 2 months later, they were gone. But so just be aware of that. The water cooler chit chat. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of water coolers these days, but there is also office gossip that goes around, right? So people can hear, rumors of this or that. So just be aware of what the underlying rumors are that are floating around of somebody not being happy, somebody that's kind of looking around a little bit, and also, somebody suddenly taking vacation days. Most people plan their vacations a long time in advance, but if you have a team person who suddenly says, hey, I need to take Thursday off, and then 3 days later they're back and say, oh, I need to take Monday off, and then 2 days later I need Friday off. You might suspect that maybe they're interviewing at other companies or something. And so, or they leave for the day for extended periods of time. Maybe they go out for lunch and take a 4-hour lunch or something. But these are just some of the warning signs that you should be looking at to understand that you may have a flight risk on your hands. Uh, and so what do you do about that, right? So let's talk just a little bit about that. I really like this. Beth Carver, who spent 12 years researching exit interviews. These were the two reasons that she found that people were leaving, and that was a loss of training opportunities and a lack of mentors. Two situations that are very, very easy to solve and to make sure it doesn't happen in your team. But unfortunately, and this is the part that hurts a little bit as a manager, but do you understand what the number one reason why people leave their current position? And unfortunately, it's true, but it's because they don't like their manager. Almost every HR recruiter firm will tell you when you look at the analytics, 80% of people leave their job because they cannot get along with their manager. They don't feel appreciated. They don't feel like their manager likes them. The manager doesn't treat them well. But in almost, 8 out of 10 people that walk out the door do so because of you. So don't be that guy or that girl. Don't be the manager that forces someone to go look for another job someplace else. Okay, so once you've identified that you may have a person that's a flight risk, a couple of things that you can do. There are some options. Some companies, especially larger ones, they have what is called a flight risk status that you can put a person in. And that status varies from company to company, but it sometimes puts them, kind of in a little bit of a special situation where they may accelerate, a raise or a promotion or some accommodation for that particular person. But again, check with your HR if you don't already know if they have one. Check with your HR people to see if such a status exists for those people. And then secondly, your other option is when somebody says they want to leave, see if you can find out what the real reason is. Most people, especially to managers, will give a very good story as to why it is they want to leave. And how many times have you read in a news article or something about a CEO or a officer of a company who steps down to spend more time with their family? That just seems to be the cliche answer as to why that person's leaving. 90% of the time, people know that that is not the reason why they're leaving. They're leaving for a different reason. And so, depending on how well you know the people in your team, when they give you the answer why they're leaving, give it the soup test. Does it sound right? Does it really sound like that's the reason they're leaving? Or see if you can find out what the real reason is, because if you can, then maybe you can do something about it. But sometimes you can't, right? So in a nutshell, I would like to use this quote from Sir Richard Branson, which is, train people well enough so they can leave, but treat them well enough so they don't want to. That I think that is a key, and that is something that almost every manager has control over. So you can do that. So let's move on to the next section, which is one of my favorite sections, I think. And that is, how do you incentivize people with limited resources? Obviously, the best way to incentivize people is to give them a big raise or some sort of a promotion, more responsibilities, or send them off on a vacation or send them to a conference somewhere or something. There's lots of ways that you can make people happy, but many of those ways take money or budget that you probably don't have and have no control over. So how do you incentivize people when you don't have any money? So let's go over some ideas that I think are going to be useful. The first one is gift cards. You can always give somebody a gift card. Depending on where you work, though, you do have to be careful if that's a company-sponsored event, because especially in the United States. Anytime companies give out gift cards, those are taxable events. So make sure you don't break any rules when you do that, but there's nothing that prevents you as an individual from buying a gift card and giving it to somebody. But again, be careful how you do that one, but that is something that is useful sometimes. Maybe it's software. Maybe you've got somebody on your team that's working on a project, or they have a particular software program that they've always wanted or wish they had that would make their life easier. And maybe you don't have budget for raises or other things, but sometimes you can go to the IT group and say, especially if you have a site license for something, can we get this person on that list so that they can use this piece of software? I know most of these things are pretty simple and maybe they're basic, but there's things that do make a difference. And so better equipment. Maybe you can just upgrade their computer or give them a second monitor or give them a different keyboard or something. You know, again, depends on your company, but some ideas, a lot of companies do refresh cycles. And so those are budgeted out of different things. And so maybe you can either accelerate that refresh cycle for this particular person, or if it happens, the timing coordinates well, you can maybe get them something that's a little bit better than they would have otherwise. Uh, comp time is always a good one. When the person, you can see maybe they're doing a great job and they're doing well, but they're maybe a little tired or something. Just tell them, hey, take Friday off. A lot of managers have that discretion that, again, you're in charge of the time of your team, right? And so you could have discretion to tell them, take a half day off or take a full day off or take a few hours off, something. Doesn't cost you anything, right, to do that. It does cost the company, but the company's paying their salary. But, as long as you match that with the team goals and understand that the team goals are being met and your team is meeting its requirements and its obligations, then maybe that's something that you can sneak in there from time to time. Or maybe you're working on a project, you give this person a little bit more input into how that project's going to be run or what you're going to do. Kind of let them take a little bit more of a lead role in that. Again, we talked about this earlier, but subject matter experts, make them a subject matter expert if they're not already one, or if you need one. A lot of people take pride in being an SME because they know that if there's ever a question or an issue, that's where the people are going to come. One company I worked for, they had a customer that called up that needed some help. They needed somebody on site immediately, and so they looked around and they said, well, who's the SME in this particular project? They identified that person, and literally 48 hours later, they were on a plane to Norway for a week. Sometimes things like that happen, and maybe you can help that person to put them in a position where they can, really contribute to the company and help the company out when the company's in need. But again, that gives them a little bit of incentive and a little bit, makes them feel a little bit better. Free training time. This is something that you have a lot of control over, and maybe you can tell them, every Thursday from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock is time I'm going to set aside for you to learn something new, to take an online class or a course or a skill or practice something. Give them something they can do that. Schedule latitude. If you're in a situation where you don't have to follow a time clock exactly because of customer constraints, maybe you can let this person come in half an hour later or leave a half an hour earlier than the normal team. A lot of companies have gone to what they refer to as core hours. And so they expect you to be there, say, from 9 to 4. But to get your 8 hours in, you can make the rest of those 8 hours either before 9 or after 4, just depending on your situation. But talk with that person and, and let them set up a schedule that's more convenient for them. Or you can make them proxy status. And by proxy, I mean that sometimes you send them to a meeting instead of you. They kind of become a proxy for you for whatever reason, but it kind of gives them a little bit sense of importance and gives them an extra responsibility. But and sometimes it's just really, very, very simple things. Let them work on a pet project that they have an idea for, or something that they've been thinking about or have mentioned a few times. Um, Maybe they don't like the way their workspace is set up, and so let them reorganize their workspace in a manner that's more conducive for them, or things that they can do. Um, make them more visible. You know, help them. Give them a few extra assignments or something that they can enhance their visibility with, or added responsibility. Some things that people really like, because again, we're just trying to help this person to grow and to feel comfortable and to feel like they're truly contributing, because that's really what people want. When you ask, again, the surveys have all shown that people want to feel valued and feel like they're contributing. And so uh, maybe you can't pay them more money, but these are just some of the things that you can do. You can let them be the liaison between your team and other teams. Comes with added responsibility and a little bit added status in there. But last of all on my list, but I think this is probably the absolutely most important one, and that is just simply say thank you. Uh, Time after time after time, people do things that they don't feel like were ever recognized. And just simply saying thank you is enough to make that person happy. And so again, we don't always have all the things that we want to be able to do everything for everybody. But if you're ever in a situation where you need to improve someone, help them feel more valued, then here's just some ideas that I came up with of how to incentivize them without breaking the bank, without getting money involved or other situations. So hopefully these can give you some ideas as a manager of where to start and what to do. And so let's move on to one of the last topics and one of the last ideas that you as a manager need to deal with, and that is underperformers. I mean, unfortunately, we always hope that everybody does what they're supposed to, that life was good and that everybody works out. But unfortunately, those situations arise where you have people that just simply are struggling for whatever that reason is. And so your job as a manager now is to find a way for that person to succeed, and and whatever that is. So let's just talk briefly about, you know, what do we do with them? How do we uh, help this person find success, whether that success is in the company or someplace else? Because success in this instance has a lot of different meanings. So the first thing that you want to do is, if you have a person that's struggling, that's not performing well, is go talk with your HR people and understand what your options are. What kinds of things can you do, or what kinds of things can't you do? Again, kind of look at this like one of the flight risk issues is, sometimes HR has a special category for underperformers. They have things that, that they will kick in, some different protocols that will happen. So first off, check with HR. Um, I should add on to there, put a slash on that, say check with HR/your manager as well, whoever you're reporting to, for their guidance and help. I know that as I've gone through this presentation and talked, I haven't really talked a whole lot about the role that your manager has in all of this. But as always, hopefully your manager is listening to this as well, and they're understanding what they should be doing with you. But again, do not ever hesitate to reach out to your manager for the help that you need. But again, check with HR about what things you can do. If you decide that some sort of corrective action is necessary, the first thing you need to decide is, whether it's going to be a formal or an informal type of plan that you're going to put together, because you have to create some sort of a plan. Um, the preference is always to start with an informal plan first, because that gives you the most latitude as a manager and gives you the most control as to what's going on. Because once you hit the formal stage, then it usually gets out of your hands and lies squarely with HR as to what's going to happen. But again, decide, which way you're going to do this, either formally or informally. Create an improvement plan. And improvement plans, most of you probably are familiar with them, but if you're not, they're very simple. It basically is just a document, a plan that says, we've noticed that you're struggling or having a problem in these specific areas, and we feel that these things need to be improved, and this is the plan as to how we're going to help you improve those areas. So come up with a plan, and of course, the end of that is the consequence of, at the end of this plan, either we will decide that the problems have been corrected, or we will decide that the situation that you're in is just not resolvable, and you'll be asked to go look for employment elsewhere. So things that we really want to try to avoid. But once you have somebody that's either on formal or informal probation, let's call it, uh, make sure that you have regular status meetings with that person. Keep them informed, help them to know, let them tell you what their successes are or their failures are or where they're struggling. Make sure you share with them what you're seeing, that you're seeing either improvements or not improvements. Again, like all things, when you meet for one of these status checks, there should not be surprises that are happening. Maybe you meet once a week for the status check, and again, if that person shows up and you say, I'm not seeing anything good happening here, uh, that should not be a surprise to the person. You should already have communicated that somehow informally with that person. So make sure that you're meeting regularly with that person. Make sure that the expectations are very clear as to what it is you're trying to achieve. Um, Sometimes one of the better ways to solve this is to assign a peer mentor to that person to help them if it's a particular skill that maybe they're lacking. That person can be assigned to work with them, but make sure that they have someone that they can help, that they can lean on, that should be a peer in the team that can help them to find success. Uh, you know, Teach the person as much as you can. If it's lacking, give them the training that they need if they're missing out on training opportunities. But again, the whole point is that you want to do everything you can to help this person to succeed and to be able to be once again a productive member of the team and of the company. I mean, there's a lot of money invested in every single person that works for you. And so anytime that you lose a person, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, it costs the company, it costs your team. Um, anyway, ultimately though, once you've gone through all that, if you can't find a solution to the problem that you're trying to adjust, then that's when between you and HR and other management people, maybe the decision is it's just time for that person to move on. Um, but but always that should be the decision of last resort. You always want to try to help the person as much as you possibly can to succeed. So that's the idea with that. We've got we're pretty much getting close to the end of our uh, time frame here. So this last part that I had were just some ideas to think about. I am going to spend just a couple of minutes just running through those really quickly. We're going to skip the parable of the cookie. I don't think we have enough time for that one. We'll hold that for another seminar some other time. But just let me give you just a couple of thoughts to think about, and then we'll wrap it up and open it up for Q&A if that's okay. So very quickly, remember that when you're talking to people, that it's not always all about the presentation, but you have to have some really good things to do. And so, but understand that a good idea with a bad presentation is doomed immediately. So, but also realize that a bad idea with a good presentation is doomed to fail eventually. So make sure that as you're going about your business, that you don't just hinge everything on how you present it, but rather have actual results in what you're doing. Also, as a manager, you need to be very careful what message you're trying to send. And sometimes we send the wrong message, whether that's by mistake or poor planning on our part. But this is a pencil that was actually distributed to, I think it was 10,000 school children in Detroit, I believe is where they did this. Good message, right? But pencils are meant to be used, and as you use that pencil, the message suddenly changes and becomes not the message that you wanted to send. So be very careful about what message you're sending and how you present that message to your team. And then also realize that not having all the information you need is never an excuse for not starting the progress or the project that you're working, because you're never going to have it. So don't say we're waiting to get this or we're waiting to get that. Also remember, this is a pretty common saying, especially if you're in the aerospace industry, that better is the enemy of good, right? Sometimes things are just good enough and just, we just need to move on. Again, this particular idea touches back to what I briefly mentioned earlier in if you're working in an agile environment, you don't add things that shouldn't be added at times when they shouldn't be there. Don't try to do more than as absolutely necessary, because every time you do, you almost always end up causing more problems than you tried to solve. And so don't do more than what you planned. That's the great thing about agile environment, is those sprints are usually fairly short, 2 weeks. Um, you know, whatever needs to happen, see if you can push it off to the next sprint. But along with that is, again, don't wait. You're better off doing something than nothing, right? And so let's get something done, but let's not stress about making it perfect. And then make sure you keep the idea that there's never a single right solution, but there are always multiple wrong ones. And you've got to make it work until, or let me say, you can't make it work until you get it better. And sometimes the fastest way to get something done is to throw everything out and start all over again. And so remember that. And then this last one, I think this is one that I think has bitten probably pretty much everybody in the industry, and that is, there's never enough time to do it right, but somehow there's always enough time to do it over. Try not to get into that particular situation. Try to avoid that as much as you possibly can. So those are the thoughts. We're just gonna, that's pretty much the end of that. Let me just spin right through this. We'll wrap it up here because we're pretty close out of time. So remember, as a manager, show your value to yourself. Make sure that you understand who you are. Don't have imposter syndrome. Make sure that you do what you can to keep your team members happy, educated, engaged. Show your value to upper management, and make significant, show the contributions that you make to your company. And I think those are the things that really set you apart as a manager at the end of the day. And so with that, let me just close by saying congratulations. If you managed to get this far, give yourself a pat on the back and print out your own certificate, because a QTAP is not a real thing, but it sounds good, right? And with that, I will send it back to James.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad. That was a fantastic presentation. I think we have some questions from the audience if you're ready. We got one right now. And it is, what do you think is the biggest mistake managers make that lead them to clash or not get along with their team?
I think the biggest mistake that managers make is that they react too soon before they actually listen to what the real issue is. They kind of feel like they're pressured a little bit and need to come up with a solution almost immediately, but sometimes that's not the case. I think it's more important to listen and truly understand what the concern is before you pronounce your judgment. But that's kind of my take on that.
Okay, perfect. Next question. How do you improve a relationship with a team member if they don't like you or you don't like
Well, that is a really tough question. And that really is, I think, kind of the point behind the team building activities. If you can't stand to be in the room with each other alone, then try to put yourself in situations where you're in the room together with other people that can act as buffers. But again, try to understand, why is it that you don't like that person or they don't like you? And as a manager, sometimes you just have to swallow your pride or whatever, and just try to deal with that person as best you can. And again, if it's a situation that is self-destructing, that is not going to be resolved, uh, that's not a good situation either. And the best thing to do is you have to get a third party mediator in to help out. I don't, again, I don't want to jump straight to, well, obviously you need to just then get rid of that person, transfer them off your team. Well, maybe that's not the case. Maybe you need to transfer to a team. And so, I don't think that removing somebody from a team is ever the appropriate answer if you don't get along. I think the answer is you have to do the hard part and figure out why you don't get along, and then try to resolve the situation, because it's it's not fair usually to just resort to being completely overpowering versus just trying to work with the person.
Perfect, great answer. Um, in how to incentivize people without resources, some of the examples may result in the perception of playing favorites. How would you ensure that doesn't happen?
And that's true. It very well could appear that way. And so that's part of the thing that you have to kind of be careful with, as you do that. And then it's kind of the tightrope that you have to walk. And make sure that if somebody brings that to mind and says, hey, how come so and so got this and I didn't, don't be shy. Tell them why. He says, well, I gave James that piece of software because he spent the last 3 months, he was working 15 hours a day trying to help me on this particular project. And that was kind of his reward for doing that. If you have a similar type of a thing, then let's see what you can do to be able to earn that as well. Because, yeah, like I said earlier, you don't want to play favorites and you don't want clicks, but as you are doing these kinds of things, then let people understand why that happened. It's not, it's not a secret. You're not trying to do something secretly or underhanded. You want to be open and transparent about it, and maybe that, you can even make that a topic in your team meeting is, we're giving James, this software because of, look at all the excellent work he did, or we're gonna, let him rearrange his workspace because of this particular need. And so, be honest with the people and tell them why you're doing it. and help them to understand that what you're doing is open to everyone that meets the qualification, whatever that happens to be, so that you don't have that perception of playing favorites.
Right, makes sense. This kind of plays off of that, but what do you do if you have two rock stars in one team?
Jump for joy that you got two rock stars. Um, Honestly, I mean, you want everybody to be a rock star in your team. So I guess I don't really understand the question enough to know why that would be a concern. Because I think that would be good. Uh, I don't know. So whoever asked that, can you kind of clarify why you think that's a problem? Because I don't honestly see why that would be.
He says conflicting stars.
Well, okay. I guess then it's trying to figure out how, in which way do they conflict, really. Um, I guess I will admit defeat on that one. I'm not really sure what the best way to do that. I would have to be a little bit more in tune with who the people are and kind of their situation to try to figure out the best way to plan for it. Um, but I'm sorry for that one though.
Okay, no problem. If they want to reach out, you got your email right there. They can reach out to you and maybe go more in depth with that question for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, next question. Um, I guess it's more of a statement. By the time we see the flight risk signs, most people have already set their minds to leave. I would guess maybe how do you address that?
Um, and that's true. I mean, it's people are making up their mind, but I think the thing that changes people's mind though is when they actually see real change and real um, movement, I guess, to trying to address their problems. Um, if people, obviously they haven't left yet, so they're in that process, but until they actually give you that resignation letter, there's still a chance to salvage that relationship. And that's why you want to try to find out what the real reason that they're leaving is so that you can work with them and say, wow, I didn't understand that this was that big of an issue to you. What can we do to try to help resolve that and do what you can? Um, and it works, but again, if someone has truly made up their mind, it's very difficult to change them from doing that. But hopefully, again, as we talked about earlier, you want to treat them in such a way that they don't feel like that their only alternative to solving their problem is walking out the door. Hopefully the one-on-one interviews, you've been able to be in touch, and with the water cooler chit chat and just the rumors that you hear floating around, you can try to address that situation before it gets way out of control. Or if it has, then you know just do the best you can to help that person understand that you really want to try to address the situations and the problems that they're having to help them stay around. And unfortunately, sometimes those things are really out of your control. Maybe it's a corporate thing, a corporate direction, something that you can't control. But in that case, then don't blame yourself for it because it's not your fault. It's the uh, something that you can't control. And again, being a manager, that is one of the things that you have to understand is don't beat yourself up for something that you have no control over because it's not your fault. And so don't don't make your life miserable because of somebody else's decision. Choose to be strong and to move forward and roll with the punch. That's what managers do.
Perfect, great answer. It looks like we have time for one more quick question. I like all the examples for incentivizing without resources, but how do you decide which to offer if you are not sure what the person actually likes? I guess you try to figure that out, what they want in the one-on-one.
Yeah, it is, and I think that honestly, if you have an idea that maybe they would like A, B, or C, in your one-on-one, just say, you know what, I've noticed you've been doing some, some little extra, or I really want to be able to do something nice for you. I don't have money, I can't pay for anything, but here are 3 things I can do. Which one of these 3 things would you like the best? What would mean the most to you? And then, give them an option between what you think are the 3 best options for them to choose from, and let them do that. And if none of those sound right to that person, then just say, well, give me a suggestion. These are things that I can do, but give me a suggestion, and and if it's something that I can do, then we'll see if we can't make it happen. But I think the first resort, though, is to give them an option, and if that still doesn't work, then just flat out ask them.
Perfect. That was great. That's all the questions we have for today. That was a great presentation, Bradley. We enjoyed having you as always. Fortunately, it's not in person this time, but we hope to change that soon, and we hope to see you hopefully later this year in 2021.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. So before we go today, just a couple reminders. If you are looking to start a new career or are looking to advance in your current career, be sure to register for Raj's Career Advancement Workshop by visiting SoftwareTestPro.com/training. Also, our next scheduled webinar will take place on April 7th. Angela Riggs, Ashley Hunsberger, and Lena Weiberg will be giving a panel presentation on self-care and how taking time for yourself is important in today's busy and chaotic environment. Visit SoftwareTestPro.com to sign up for this webinar and view the upcoming webinars from SAP in 2021. And if you'd like to be considered for a webinar presentation or have an idea for a great testing topic, visit SoftwareTestPro.com and submit your proposal today. And with that, thank you so much, Bradley. We enjoyed having you. Your great presentation, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you, everyone who attended. Have a great day and stay safe.